Guys, if you have not been having fun, you're about to really start having fun. That didn't make any sense. You're about to really start having fun. This is day 22. We have exited the observation phase of Bible study, where you observe all the facts, all the details, the grammatical structure, the literary context, the grammatical context, the cultural context, those kinds of things. Now what we get to do is interpret the data, okay? So I've taught you, hopefully by now, what to look for and what to do about it. And now what we can do is interpret that data. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14 in verse 13, I meant verse 22 through 23. And this is a very, very familiar story to most of you. This is the story of Jesus walking on water, right after he feeds the 15 to 20,000 people. So what we get to do is interpret the data. Interpretation, this phase of Bible study, which will become, I promise, like the more you do this, it will become easier and more natural. But essentially, as you read the Bible, you don't just want to, observe certain things. As you're observing it, you want to be thinking through what it means. What's the meaning behind this? What is the interpretation of this data? For instance, Jesus walks on water here in verse 22 of Matthew chapter 14. Okay, I'm going to read it. And as we go along, what I'm going to do is hopefully interpret this. So we're in gospel narrative, right? So we're trying to go through all these different genres. So in the gospel, I'm going to try and interpret this for you and tell you what this means. Not just what it says, not just what the data is, but what it means. What frustrates me is the fact that we'll just go like this. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. Okay, while he dismissed the crowds. So what do we observe so far? Jesus just fed, 20,000 people. He's told the disciples, hey, you guys go to the other side on the boat, and I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to pray. After he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Okay, so what this tells me is, I'm going to interpret the data for you, is that Jesus just fed a bunch of people. Right after he heard John the Baptist died, he hasn't processed it yet fully. He's going to just spend some time alone. He sends the disciples away, and now he's going to pray, right? What this means is prayer is very important to Jesus. That's what that means. And what you'll see is this relates to what's about to happen. When evening came, he was there all alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. Okay. Now, Jesus is the one who did send them in the boat to go across to the other side. So, is it possible? Can we accurately and faithfully interpret this text to mean that sometimes God will send you through an intentional storm to show you what he's capable of? I believe so. The way we interpret the data is to go, well, what does this mean? And then once you come to a conclusion, you go, is there any other biblical text that supports that conclusion? And I would say, yeah, Psalm 23, James chapter 1, John 16, all these passages talk about, God will often lead us through and into a storm for the sake of showing us his power like he's about to do here. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. This is important because these are the facts. He's walking on the sea. These are the facts. The boat is being beaten by the waves, right? These are the facts. It's the fourth watch of the night, right? And so what we get to do is go, what does this story actually mean? What I mean by that is, what can we conclude about the data we see? Well, Jesus can walk on water. That's obvious. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, take heart. Hey, guys, it's me. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Someone say, don't be afraid. Take heart. I'm highlighting these along the way so we can go back after seeing the whole story unfold and make sense of what it means. Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Command me to come to you on the water? He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, came to Jesus, right? But when he saw the wind, he was afraid And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So let's back it up. Piece by piece, let's put this together. We see the whole picture now. Let's go back to this little section right here. Jesus walking on water means more than just he can walk on water. It actually means, if you think about it, what they're being beaten by, the waves, Jesus actually is over that. And this is fitting because the last workshop we did on day 21, we talked about Jesus being above and over all. He's walking on the sea. The same chaotic seas that have the potential to kill the disciples right now, Jesus is actually walking on that. He's controlling that. He's over it. It's not overtaking Jesus. He's actually telling the waves and commanding that the waves actually support him. The disciples see him, and this is where you start to really think through a biblical text and go, what does it mean that he walks on water? He has power over nature. He has power over the seas that could kill you. He's in control of the chaotic waters of death, right? He's over that. He's above it. This also means, we'll see in a minute, the disciples see him freak out and go, "It's a ghost," and they cry out in fear. This speaks to the human condition. This tells me that people often succumb to fear very quickly. And the initial reaction a lot of people experience when they encounter something that's unfamiliar is this thing called fear. Okay? What Jesus does is he addresses this fear. So we're just interpreting the data. Watch. Immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, "Take heart, it is I, don't be afraid." Does Jesus say, "Guys, you're dumb for being afraid"? No. He encourages them. Hey, be of good cheer. Take heart. Be comforted. It's me. Don't be afraid. So what is the basis for him saying, "Don't be afraid"? The motivation is he's there with them. It's him. He's not a ghost, right? They don't need to be afraid because it's not a ghost, so he calms their fears. So how do we interpret this data? Jesus intends to calm our fears when we're in the middle of storms. Disciples are in their own physical storm, right? We go through stuff, right? So I'm getting a little bit into the application side of things, but the data tells me that Jesus encourages the disciples, tells them not to be afraid, speaks to their fear, right? We can at least go that far. I don't have to bring myself into the text yet. And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So does Jesus tell Peter, "You're crazy. Why would I ever do that?" No, he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water. What does that tell me? Well, the data tells me Jesus can enable someone else to walk on water. The same power he has over creation and over the chaotic waters, he actually invites Peter into that. Not that Peter's the source or Peter's God. No, that Peter's actually living off of the borrowed power Jesus extends and Jesus tells creation essentially, "Hey, support my boy Peter." We can interpret that, okay? We don't have to get into application yet. We can just speak to what's happening. We'll get to application in the next phase. He sees the wind and he gets afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." So what can we say here? Well, Peter took his eyes off of who? The one who could save him. What was his eyes on? What was his attention and focus on? The wind and the waves that made him afraid. So Peter's focus was on the wrong thing, and it caused him, or it produced in him, fear. Right? So his gaze, his focus, actually caused fear in him. And he cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reaches out and took hold of him. Jesus saves people. Isn't that awesome? "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" So we have Peter doubting, getting afraid, looking at the wind and the waves, freaking out, and Jesus addresses his little faith and his doubt. That's what we can see in the text, is that Jesus addresses the doubt and the little faith of Peter. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. What does that tell me? Well, it tells me Jesus getting into the boat has something to do with the storm stopping. It's actually speaking to his power over the wind, not just the waters to walk on it, but the wind to stop it. Jesus had every, right to stop that storm whenever he wanted, but he let it continue to show Peter his power in the middle of the storm. I'm not even bringing myself into the text yet. We'll get to that when we get to application. And those in the boat worshiped him. What does that tell me? Well, the text doesn't say it was wrong. Actually, truly you're the Son of God. For Jesus to be the Son of God means he's worthy of being worshiped, right? This tells me that Jesus is deserving of worship as the Son of God. Why? Because he has power over creation. The wind, the waters, the sea, all of it. So guess what? Faith and doubt have no place when Jesus is around, because he's the Son of God and he's over anything that we might be afraid of. Now, I brought us into the text just to let you know that, there's a little wiggle room for us to just get a little micro piece of application, but it's mainly what does this mean about the disciples and Jesus? And then we'll get to application in the next phase. But that's all for this day, day 22. What I want you to do is when you go read your Bible, think about what that data means. There is underlying wisdom beneath the statements that you're reading. You can understand the data and the information, right? You can know what is being said, but do you know what it means? Do you see the spiritual wisdom or the principles or the revelation of God behind the information? That's how you interpret. That's how you make proper conclusions about a text, all right? So when you read your Bible today, do that. Don't just go, what are the observations and the grammatical context and the literary context? Take that data and go, now what does that mean? What does that reveal? All right, what's the spiritual wisdom behind this revelation of God? I hope this was helpful to you. I'll see you guys on day 23 as we continue interpreting, not in the Gospels, but in the next one, we're going to interpret wisdom literature. I'll see you guys there.